My research interests are still developing. I started off in practice of child and adolescent psychiatry, and so I've been looking after kids who are in trouble developmentally most of my adult life. But I got really interested in the difference between what the science was telling us about the role of men and women and how they were so vastly different, and how women were the chief source of positive relational experience for children. Because that wasn't what I was seeing in my office, and it's not what I was seeing in families. And I watched men develop very complex and very loving and relationships even with their babies, sometimes to the surprise of their mothers or their wives, sometimes their mothers too. But began to get interested in the early 80s about what were we going to do with these stay-at-home dads that were suddenly coming out of the woods as mothers went back to work in huge numbers as a result of the women's movement of the late 70s. What was going to happen to those babies? Did those guys know what they were doing? Did they choose to do this? And so I followed a small group of men who were stay-at-home dads and found, even though I was advised against doing it, my career was young and I might not really find much of anything except children who were suffering maternal deprivation. But I didn't find that. I found children who were developing well, competently, supportive relationships with their partners in the raising of these children. And so that was the first bit of news, which is that there isn't much news when men do this. The children are not at risk. Things don't go haywire. Doesn't drive the men crazy, the women crazy. That was one of the first research pieces that got me thinking, there's a lot more here than we understand. If you do positively engage fathers early in the lives of their children, especially their young children, the children are better ready for school, they are less aggressive in their problem solving, they are more easily socialized to the needs of other people. The men and the women are less depressed and less anxious. All of those are risk factors in abuse and neglect. Most of my work focuses on the first 3 years of life because that's the most important time to get it right. And it's the easiest time to fix things, keep them from going wrong, and that we as a society get a big bang for our buck if we spend the right money at the right time on the right things. When I started doing observations and looking at the literature about how mothers and fathers behave differently with their babies from the beginning, there wasn't a lot, but there was enough literature to help me start to look for things. And since then, there is more and more literature on this very area. And what we've discovered is that men and women fall in love with their babies in slightly different ways. Mothers have had to carry the baby. They've had hormonal preparation for who this infant is. They've often been socialized. They've often been told one of the most important things you'll ever do is be a mother. Maybe the only important thing you'll ever do is mother. How you hold your child, you practiced with other people's kids when you were little. You got your mother over your shoulder, your sister in the other ear telling you what to do. So there's a lot of expectation, but mothers know from very early on, this is on the job training, because babies need different things depending on the temperament of the baby. It's a lot of variables. Fathers come at this often having never even held a baby. They're obviously not their own or anybody else's. We don't pay them as babysitters very often. We don't support them as a society to do this job well. In fact, we put a lot of barriers in the way. So men often come to this rather tentatively. But what's interesting is that the babies couldn't care less. At 6 weeks of age, you'll see babies respond differently to mothers picking them up than fathers picking them up. A baby that's about to be picked up by the mother, the eyes will begin to sort of close slightly, and the heart and respiratory rates will regularize. Shoulders relax, mom. And the dad, 6 weeks of age, goes to pick up the baby. Eyes open, shoulders hunch, heart and respiratory rates go up. It's dad, party time, or whatever it is. We don't really know. But there is already a physiologic distinction between maternal approach, paternal approach. What's the value of that to the baby? You gotta ask. Because no one's teaching the baby to do this. So I think we can all agree there's evolutionary advantage to know who can feed you from their body and who can't. There may also be an advantage to knowing who might be a little stronger and faster to get you away from the saber-toothed tiger that's walking around the family campfire. So so these are good distinctions to have. So that early stuff takes the mother-child, father-child early interaction in slightly different directions. Mothers often hold their babies close to them, comfort, safety. Fathers often hold their children more like this, with the baby's on the side, facing out. This is, I'm going to let you see the world after I've checked it out for you. This is, hey, let's see what's happening today. I've heard this called, my child is hood ornament by fathers, because they do want to present their children to the world and encounter it together. Let's see what's going on, as opposed to, I'm going to check this out for you and make sure everything's fine. Okay, some people are sort of saying, well, which one's right and which one's wrong? Wrong question. They're both right. And when you weave them together, you begin to have a child who is comfortable this way and this way. And what a nice way to sort of understand the world is all of these things. I can be fine in all of them. You'll also see when the baby gets stuck on the bottom stair and they're trying to learn how to crawl up, you're likely to see a mom move in a little sooner to help get the unstuck knee and and stay very close. You're likely to see the father stand back a little bit and say, I think you can do that. Come on, you can do it. Gets frustrated, starts to fuss a little. Honey, why aren't you helping him? He's going to do it himself. You'll hear these kinds of different styles, and the father often says he's got to do it. They're not going to be tying his shoes for him when he goes to UCLA. Mother says, why make it hard for him? Life is tough enough. Do the shortcut thing. She's speaking directly from her experience. She wants a level playing field for the child, and in fact, she's willing to level the playing field for the child. Often the father says it doesn't work for kids who take shortcuts. They're going to have to do the work and find their own way. Again, both right, woven together, you got a good safety net. One of the things that isn't so different is the capacity of the mother and the father to attune to the needs of their child. Mothers and fathers, when they have had enough time with their child, can tell when they're hungry, can tell when the cry is, don't pass me around to anybody else, I've had it, or I'm sick and I'm about to throw up, or please change my diaper, or I'm beyond tired, please put me to sleep. Moms and dads can figure those things out. They can read those signals. Mothers tend to read the signals in a sort of smoother, this is what you need, and I'm going to fulfill your needs that way. Dads, it's a little bit more like this. Is that what you need? Okay, let's get it right away. Come on, then we can do something else. Fathers like to activate their children. Moms like to soothe and moderate their children. So once again, you're going to see some benefit to both, and especially when they're woven together. So in the first year of life, it's a mistake for the dad to hang back and say, I'll play with him when he can hold a ball, or I'll get involved when he finally can say a sentence. These first years are up to you. Wrong idea, bad idea, because most fathers are unaware that when they have their children, they are physiologically prepared in ways they won't be again to be connected to this baby. Oxytocin levels, the relationship hormone, very high in men, completely unexpected finding. Susan Carter, Ruth Feldman, people who have done this lovely research for us, they were looking for low levels of oxytocin in men because the women have very high levels because it's responsible for breastfeeding, preparing the breast for lactation, shutting down the uterus after birth. So what's it doing in men? Well, turns out it is softening you up quite literally and physiologically to allow this baby to affect you, to come into your mind and into your life. and, into your arms as well as into your soul. So these are, the guy's a sucker for the baby. And so get in there early, because we know that is going to protect against all kinds of bad stuff: abuse, neglect, unhappy relationships, incompetent, depressed dads, depressed moms. All those things get guarded against when you've got this good relationship right from the beginning. So we're a big fan of saying, dads, get in here. You're not in the cheap seats. We need you here. We need you now, because the baby's ready and you're ready for this to be changed. That's often news to some women. They're not sure they really want their men that close to their babies, because they want to get to know the baby first. But it's a wise woman who says, take your time with the baby this morning. You guys get to know each other. A lot of this work has made me think about the history of fatherhood. How new is this? What is this, something new under the sun, or is it not? It's just another cycle in human development. And we know that the historians who've studied this issue tell us that before the Industrial Revolution, men were very close to their children. They worked with them. They often were present at the birth and delivery. They often delivered their babies when life was on the farm. And so the children were often very close to their dads. Then comes along the Industrial Revolution. Dads go off to the mill for 12 hours a day, sometimes months at a time. And the hearth becomes the mother's to control. And then, World War I, World War II changed the role of men and women in myriad ways. We are now in a revolution about paternal engagement. We have not seen what we are now seeing, maybe ever, which is, in the last generation, paternal engagement has become the expectation, not the exception. Newly marrying couples, he's going to share. Of course I'm going to share. I don't want her doing it all. She's going to work, I'm going to work. But I want to be closer to this kid than my dad was to me. I missed out on something. Or I was close to my dad, and I want to make sure my kids are close to me, because that's one of the high points of my life. So it has been, I think the women's movement in the 70s may have a lot to do with the generations that came after and how they're sorting this out. Men and women have never been as close as they are now about how upset they are about work-family tension, work-family balance, how tough that is. They're on the same side of this issue now. That was not the case even a generation ago. But now you're seeing young men who are lucky enough to have a job often trying to negotiate to get time off when they become parents. And they're worried about job security, but they're also asking. They're no longer just hiding and calling it sick leave when they go home in the way they did 10 years ago. So I have been privileged to watch quite a change. And the researchers on marriage history, Stephanie Kuntz, and the great Californian, has been following these attitudes for 40 years. And she's very much in that same camp, which is that we are in terra incognita. And I think even as divorce rates remain pretty high, they're not as high as they were 10 years ago, but they're still pretty high. A lot of tension and stress in families. This is very hard work to do. Another reason to get started well early with the support of your community and each other is that the delight in this job can be endless if you're not trying to be a professional at it. Love your kid, feel their love, grow in their love, and support each other in the doing of it day after day. And by the end of that day, you will have felt this was absolutely worth everything I put into it. When a father is positively engaged in his child's life, he does better in school. He stays in school longer. If it's a daughter, she does better in math and the technical sciences. If it's a boy, he's likely to be less aggressive in his problem solving. Both boys and girls are less gender stereotyping when they've had a dad involved in their lives. Initial sexual activity is delayed until the children are more mature. They're not looking for love in all the wrong places. So you've got better problem solvers, better students, higher literacy rates, which is often a shock to people because men don't talk a lot to their children. That's one of the ways of saying when fathers are present, these are stronger outcomes for their children. Having said that, there are some unique things dads do. They are more roughhousing than mothers ever are. They do tend to frustrate and tease. They discipline slightly differently. They discipline around real-world implications of your misbehavior. Moms tend to discipline in terms of their the emotional consequences of you're not listening to me. When you don't listen to me, you and I are not friends. And we're not going to be friends until you either apologize or start listening to me together. Not a real-world implication. It's a real relationship implication of misbehavior. And those are slightly different. One of the most unique things about paternal interaction with children is what we call the arousal coping capacity. You watch men throw their babies up into the air, tease them, hang them upside down, tickle them until they're going to throw up. And then you watch what happens as the child gets themselves back under control and calms down with the help of the father. So the management of intense, novel behavior does seem to be something dads are particularly interested in, and they're particularly skilled at it. And so when that's not present, you sometimes have a kid with an impulse disorder or a behavior because they can't manage the excitement around them or in them the way that they could have if they'd had all this training at the hands of their dads. In this day of the Affordable Care Act, we're always thinking about the implications for health of any changes. And there are some health implications of paternal engagement. I've already mentioned a couple of the sexual attitudes, behavior, staying away from juvenile justice. Those are all healthy things. But the real health changes occur in the fathers. He's less likely to be engaged in impulsive behavior, so he's not involved in as many accidents. He tends to live longer, not only for the lack of impulsive behavior, but just general health. He's likely to not change jobs as often. And he's likely to be a little less depressed and anxious. So his health gets better once he becomes a father. And really, if we were keeping a close eye on this, we would lower insurance premiums for men who become fathers. I know I've been talking a lot about what a good idea it is for fathers to be positively engaged, but that's certainly not the case for every American child. So how do we see that being encouraged or supported? What makes a man be involved, complex, comes from a lot of different things in him and around him. If he had a good experience with his dad, he's more likely to want to repeat it with his children, boy or girl. If he philosophically wants to fix a deficit that he had in his own life with his dad's absence, he's likely to really put his back into it. It's not going to come naturally to him, but he's going to at least try. If he had a really good experience, he's going to want to repeat that. But none of those are important as her support, his partner's support for being a positively engaged father. Because if all the other factors are present, but she doesn't think it's a good idea, it's not likely to happen. And so the mother's or partner's role in this, whether they're married or not, actually matters less than whether they've agreed to co-parent together. And her positive attitude toward it is incredibly important to the success of that enterprise for that father-child pair. And men being men, they're not going to ask for a lot of support in the doing of it, but boy, do they love it when they get it. So for the women watching this, when was the last time you really told him he was doing a great job as a dad? I guarantee you it's not as much as he hopes or as much as you think you're already doing it. So, men are very needy about this. They need to hear it, and it'll help them through those darker moments. So, I think that that's job one. Job two is to really look at the institutions that affect the well-being of America's families and say, let's treat this like a serious issue, the serious issue that it is. Let's get our schools and our health systems and our educational institutions responding positively to the paternal presence. Have the parent meetings in the evening, or ask the father to come. Don't make the mother do all the inviting. Reach out directly to him. So we're not even asking because we don't expect or we're not supporting. But if I had, five-year-old children on my lap right now talking to you about why this was a good idea, they would tell you it's a really good idea. And their voice matters a lot more than mine. So the gender issue isn't just about fathering and mothering. It depends on whether it's cross-gender or same-gender. Now, having said that, we are aware that positive paternal engagement has a more direct on a son's aggressive potential than on his daughter's aggressive potential. Now, some of that may have to do with the fact that the woman is likely to have less aggressive potential than the man to begin with. I mean, the daughter as opposed to the son. But we do watch fairly significant differences in that effect when we do follow-up studies. So, having spent a little time on that, I want to say the most important thing, however, is not your child's gender. It's not even yours. It's the nature of the relationship that you have. It's the sensitivity to who they are, what they need, what they can stand, what their dreams are, what they believe in, what you believe in about them. Those are far more important than gender.